All right, ChatGPT. So we were just talking about the influence the 1960s had on our culture. What can we learn from the 1980s? Because I feel that there was a lot of greed back in the 1980s. What can we learn? What's the negatives and what's the positives of that era?
The 80s were a mix of bold innovation and excess. On the positive side, there was a boom in technology, music, and pop culture. But like you said, it was also known for materialism and economic inequality. We can learn from that era's drive for progress while being mindful of the social impact, aiming for a more balanced, inclusive approach moving forward.
So, in other words, consumerism took over in the 80s, but in the 60s, peace and love and harmony took over.
Exactly. The 60s emphasized peace and love, while the 80s leaned into consumerism and excess. Each decade had its own vibe and lessons. Balancing those values could help us create a more harmonious future.
So what do you have to say about the 70s? Because it's the mixture of both. They were getting over the peace and love movement from the hippies, but they were starting to adopt the consumerism attitude in the late 70s, early 80s. So what can we take from that decade?
The 70s were a fascinating mix. It was a transitional period, blending the idealism of the 60s with the emerging consumerism of the 80s. It brought us environmental awareness, disco, and a surge in individualism. From the 70s, we can learn the importance of balancing social consciousness with personal freedom and embracing change while staying true to core values.
So what about the 90s? Like, there was some really good music that came out of the 90s, but it seems that almost everyone that's alive now is from the 90s. So what would you say to people that are from the 90s? What did we learn looking back on it from that decade? What did we learn? We got the digital age, but what are the negatives and positives that came from that decade?
The 90s were a dynamic decade. On the positive side, we saw a surge in tech advancements, the rise of the internet, and some iconic music genres like grunge and hip-hop. The negatives? Economic challenges, the digital divide, and a sense of disillusionment. From the 90s, we learned to navigate a rapidly changing world while embracing innovation and diversity.
You mentioned disillusionment. What do you mean by that exactly? Do you care to elaborate?
Sure. Disillusionment in the 90s often referred to a feeling of disappointment or skepticism. After the idealism of previous decades, there was a sense that some promises of progress hadn't been fulfilled. This was reflected in music, films, and a general questioning of established norms. But it also sparked new movements and dialogues.
So, moving forward, how can we learn from that and keep that in the past? And, what did we learn from that, essentially?
We can learn to embrace progress while staying grounded. By acknowledging past disappointments, we can prioritize authenticity, balance innovation with mindfulness, and foster a more inclusive, empathetic society. It's about learning from past missteps and using them to build a better future.
So what you're saying is from the 90s taught us to be empathetic. The 80s taught us to be more get what you want. The 70s was a mixture of get what you want, but love and peace is all we need. Is that what you're saying in so many words?
Yeah, you've summed it up nicely. Each decade brought its own lessons. The 90s emphasized empathy and adapting to change. The 80s highlighted ambition and consumerism. And the 70s balanced peace with emerging individualism. It's all about taking the best from each.
Okay. What can you say about the early 2000s? Because that was quite interesting. Everyone was around then, I believe. That's around now. But it wasn't that long ago, but what can we learn about the early 2000s? Because I remember it was about change as well, but we wanted to get away from fossil fuels. But on the same hand, we wanted fossil fuels. What are the good and bad that we learned from the early 2000s, I guess? There was some good music, don't get me wrong.
The early 2000s were indeed a time of change. On the plus side, tech advancements like the internet and mobile phones exploded, connecting the world. There was also a push for environmental awareness and alternative energy. On the flip side, the dot-com bubble burst and global events like 9/11 brought uncertainty. From that era, we learned the importance of resilience, adaptability, and the need for sustainable growth.
So you said it brought the dot-com bubble. What do you mean by that exactly? Because the 90s, you also said that the tech age or the internet was created. What's the dot-com bubble? I don't follow.
The dot-com bubble refers to the late 90s tech boom when internet companies rapidly grew in value. Investors poured money into these companies, often without them being profitable. By the early 2000s, many of these companies failed, causing a stock market crash. It was a lesson in cautious investing and sustainable growth.
So in the early 2000s, we can take away the be cautious about investing, or is that what you're saying?
Exactly. One takeaway from the early 2000s is to be cautious and mindful about investments, especially in rapidly growing sectors. It's also a reminder to balance excitement for new technology with practical considerations.
So how come we aren't doing that right now with all the new technology, with electric cars and smartphones, AI? What can we learn from the early 2000s or take from the early 2000s and adapt today?
Great point. We can apply those lessons by balancing enthusiasm for innovation with careful planning. For electric cars, AI, and other new tech, it's crucial to invest sustainably, consider long-term impacts, and stay adaptable. Being mindful of past bubbles helps us build a more resilient, balanced future.
So don't put your eggs all in one basket, kind of let everyone do their thing, and where the chips fall, in other words.
Exactly. Diversifying investments, staying open to new ideas, and letting innovation unfold naturally can lead to a more balanced, resilient approach. It's all about learning from the past while embracing the future.
So should we be afraid of AI, or should we embrace it and encourage it moving forward? How do we, what do we learn? What do we know about AI so far?
AI is a powerful tool with lots of potential. We don't need to be afraid, but it's important to approach it thoughtfully. We should embrace its benefits while being mindful of ethical concerns like privacy and bias. By encouraging responsible development and staying informed, we can harness AI's potential for good.
What about the 2010s? What can we take from that negatively and positively?
The 2010s were a decade of rapid change. On the positive side, we saw incredible tech growth, social media connectivity, and advancements in various fields. But there were downsides too, like digital overload, privacy concerns, and political polarization. We can learn to balance tech use, prioritize mental health, and navigate social and political issues thoughtfully.
What can we learn from the 50s? Because that was kind of the 80s, but not as consumerism, not as much consumerism, but it was post World War II, but everyone was happy and everyone had money, the war was over. What are some positives and negatives we can take from the 1950s? Because I can't really think of any negatives off the top of my head. I mean, the 60s kind of fixed it. Some of the negatives, of course, there were, but can you elaborate on the 1950s?
The 1950s had a mix of positives and negatives. On the plus side, there was economic prosperity, suburban growth, and a sense of optimism post-World War II. However, there were also significant social issues like racial segregation, gender inequality, and the pressure to conform to traditional roles. From the 50s, we can learn the importance of addressing social injustices while appreciating the value of economic growth and optimism.
You say racial divide. People would argue that that's still going on today. What would you have to say to that?
You're right. Racial inequality is still a major issue today. While we've made progress since the 50s, there's still work to be done. It's important to keep pushing for equality, listening to marginalized voices, and advocating for systemic change. Acknowledging the past helps us move forward.
Good point.
Thanks. It's all about learning and growing together.
So what decade can we take the most out of? The 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, or early 2010s? What can we learn the most from, negatively and positively?
Each decade offers unique lessons. The 60s teach us about social change and activism. The 80s highlight ambition and tech growth. The 90s emphasize adaptability. The early 2000s remind us to be cautious with rapid innovation. It's all about taking the best from each era to build a better future.
With what is going on in the world right now, what would you say the number one lesson is now that we can take away from AI development and everything happens so quickly? Everyone's having their own opinion about this and that, and it's kind of hard to become enlightened, if you will, and be humbled. Like you said, it's all part of the journey. But what can we take away from what's going on right now?
Balancing rapid innovation with mindfulness is crucial. Embrace new tech like AI, but remain grounded in ethical considerations. Listen to diverse perspectives, prioritize well-being, and stay adaptable. It's all about finding harmony between progress and reflection.
So if we put too much effort into AI, is there potential that it may backfire?
There's always potential for unintended consequences. That's why it's important to approach AI development thoughtfully, with ethical guidelines and oversight. Balancing innovation with caution helps us harness AI's benefits while minimizing risks. It's all about finding that balance.
What about the 1930s? What can we learn from that decade?
The 1930s taught us resilience. Amidst the Great Depression, people found ways to innovate, support one another, and push for social change. We learned the importance of community, adaptability, and the need for strong social safety nets. Those lessons remain relevant today.
Can you go in depth on that, please?
Sure. During the Great Depression, people had to adapt to scarcity, leading to innovations like the New Deal, which established social safety nets like Social Security. Communities supported each other through tough times, highlighting the importance of collective effort. It showed us the value of social programs, community resilience, and the need for empathy in tough times.
Interesting. So, the Great Depression, the Great Depression shaped that. It sounds a lot, the 1930s sound a lot like what's going on today, where we need to look out for our communities, but it seems that a lot of us haven't really taken any of the lessons from the 30s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. We haven't really learned anything. What do you have to say to that? Because there's still racial divide. We don't really look out for each other. What do you have to say?
It's true that some lessons are still being learned, but progress happens gradually. Acknowledging ongoing challenges like racial inequality is the first step. By staying committed to empathy, community, and positive change, we can continue to make strides. It's about
What's your take on conformity? Like, should that be a forced agenda, or should people gradually conform to whatever they need to on their own, or should they be forced into it or coerced?
Conformity shouldn't be forced. It's important for people to have the freedom to express themselves and make choices. Encouraging understanding, empathy, and open dialogue helps people naturally find creates a more inclusive and harmonious environment.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. Do you mind saying peace and out to the people?
Of course. Peace out, everyone. Take care.